You're looking at Humphrey Bogart, and someone's got the drop on him, right? Bogart's on the right, of course, and the person that has the drop on him is holding one of the classic firearms, in my opinion. That is the Colt Detective Special. I got to hold an old example, so of course we're going to look at that today, but first a little bit of the history here. Sorry about the resolution on this old advert, but I think it's still worth including. And what you see below our Detective Special, there on the top right, below that, is another legendary Colt revolver, the Police Positive. Here it is on the right next to a Diamondback. But anyway, as you can tell, this is a snub-nosed revolver. The Detective Special is the first modern, mass-produced snub-nosed revolver. Here's a fine example, not the one I got to see, but we'll get to that one. So yeah, just such a awesome look, as a noir fan especially. I love this classic outline, just can't get enough of it. The word detective in its title is based on the fact that this was essentially made for a plainclothes detective, right? So for police work or even regular clothes, it's going to be difficult to carry a full-sized gun. Here's the one I got to inspect. This one was made in 1957. And yeah, via a process that we're going to talk about, Colt realized, well, why not make a smaller gun, of a type that you already make, essentially, and with a much shorter barrel, and market it as a detective weapon. Here's Bogart again, this time from Casablanca, and we're going to look at a lot of classic movie stills because this weapon was very popular in Hollywood, in movie making, right? It's great for criminals, private detectives, as opposed to police detectives. But hey, why not police detectives as well? Like Charlton Heston here in the Orson Welles classic Touch of Evil. That was a noir classic. And that genre, as well as just, crime fiction overall, was very fond of the Detective Special in particular and the snub-nosed revolver in general. Now, these became quite popular in the real world, right, outside of fiction, and not just with police. But first, let's go to the invention of the Detective Special. This all came about because a man named John Henry Fitzgerald, born 1876 and a former bare-knuckle prizefighter, like a real old-school tough guy, but he didn't just use his hands. He was a champion pistol shot and an innovator. Working as a salesman for Colt in the 1920s, he converted the standard .38 Special Colt Police Positive revolver into what we're looking at here, the Fitz Special, legendary gun. Basically, you take the weapon we just saw, you shorten the barrel, the ejector rod, everything on the front, basically making the weapon shorter. You bob the hammer, see how this is now hammerless, right? So that way it's much less likely to get caught on clothing or anything as you're drawing the weapon out. And most notably, you remove the front half of the trigger guard, which seems insane from a safety standpoint, but does provide easy access. It's hard for me to tell in the pictures, comparison pictures, but you also rounded the butt of the gun so that, again, you're trying to smooth out angles, like with bobbing the hammer, to facilitate a quick draw. Or it might be more accurate to say to preclude any drawing issues, which could be a real problem if drawing from regular clothing especially, not a holster. As you probably guessed, this is Fitz himself, and yeah, his invention was a hit. Rex Applegate liked it, Charles Lindbergh had one, Clyde Barrow of Bonnie and Clyde used one. Here's one actually gifted from Fitz to Rex Applegate, so that's pretty cool. Thank you, personaldefenseworld.com, for having that on the internet. Bit of a side note or side visual, but here's Colonel Applegate himself. How would you describe him? Kind of a self-defense and combatives pioneer. Yeah, so the Fitz Special was a big deal. It was the notable precedent that led to the first production snub-nose revolver. That, of course, being the Detective Special. So the Detective Special was a hit for a long time, because remember, it started in the early 20s. The Fitz Special, by the way, maybe only as many as 200 were ever made. Meanwhile, a lot of Detective Specials were made because when Colt said, hey, we really like what our employee came up with there, remember that Fitz worked for Colt, then this classic revolver was invented and produced from roughly 1927 to 1995. Here's an old one of indeterminate age, and here's the one I got to look at, and we're going to focus on in this video, which is from 1957. It looks to be in really good shape. I own two old Colt revolvers from the early 60s, and they fire just perfectly. Now remember, this was not the first small, short-barreled revolver in history. But part of this being the first modern snub-nose revolver includes that swing-out frame there. Can't remember if I mentioned that before. Anyway, with that long production run that I talked about, you can imagine these things have a very rich history. As just one example, the man on the left there is Chief Alfred Vardalos, who became a police chief in 1922. And once the detective special was invented, he carried and used one. I found this picture because there's a great website called oldcolt.com, and they will show you an old specimen and then tell you about its history, like the one owned by Chief Vardalos, which was from 1930. Here's the barrel from ours, right? The famous 2-inch barrel. These are called belly guns a lot of the times, not just this model in particular, but snub-nosed revolvers in general, because, with a barrel that short, accuracy is not going to be great over the long haul, so stick it in their belly if you want to make sure you don't miss. Here's Frank Sinatra with one. And these were so popular in crime fiction, as you can imagine, because criminals, in addition to the cops, criminals became very fond of this innovation, if you will, right? The, mass-produced pocket revolver, and I don't mean mass-produced in the negative. These were, made to very exacting standards. Mass-produced as in easy to get one, right? It's not like when Fitz was just, hand-making weapons for people who would order one from him. Here's James Bond using a detective special. That is, of course, not the handgun that 007 is most associated with. Here are the grips. Well, I love the look and feel of this kind of a thing. I really prefer it to, more modern, ergonomic, and easier to use handles. What can I say? I'm old school. So, love the name stamped into the barrel there. One of the coolest names ever, right? Detective Special. It just, again, lends itself so much to noir and detective fiction, crime fiction, that kind of a thing. Yeah, I've probably said that phrase only like 1,000 times in this video, sorry, but what are you going to do? It's a great title. Switching back to cinema, no less of a figure than Robert De Niro wielding one. He's got it trained on Charles Grodin in Midnight Run. Back to reality from fiction, I had mentioned earlier how Clyde from Bonnie and Clyde used a Fitz special. Well, it turns out that Bonnie from Bonnie and Clyde used a detective special, the one that you're seeing here on the left. And as the accompanying text says just below, this was found on her dead body when the two were finally ambushed by law enforcement. Side note about that revolver is she had that strapped to her thigh, and her idea was that it wouldn't be found if she was caught alive because a woman wouldn't be searched fully, and therefore she'd still have a weapon on her. And that plan probably would have worked if she had been taken alive, but that did not happen. A little bit of an odd resolution thing going on here, but still, you get to see the handsome box that one of these would have come in, and check out the cool label on the left. Yeah, I just love antiques. Even if I had one of those boxes without the gun, I would probably just end up keeping the box forever. But here's the fancy presentation once you do open up one of those boxes. Very classy, no doubt. And these were also made by order for the U.S. military during World War II, specifically the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA, that kind of thing. And that makes sense, because if you're a spy, you don't want a giant weapon. So anyway, these are hard to find, and this is pre98.com, kind of an auction website. I don't know if they specialize in just firearms, or if they do just firearms, but anyway, they got a hold of one of these OSS detective specials, and we're talking about how incredibly rare these are, and apparently so, because it sold for almost $8,000. Rare indeed, then, because old handguns do not go for that much or anything even close, unless there's something special about them. Well, I'm going to finish off with the fictional world, and L.A. Confidential, neo-noir masterpiece, has our weapon show up multiple times. Here's Russell Crowe with one. Here's just such a great shot from the movie featuring one that I had to include it, even though there's no actors present. Guy Pearce, another very notable actor. He's holding one in the same film. Robert Forster and Pam Grier both have or use one. The same one, if I recall, but in Jackie Brown, Quentin Tarantino movie, a great crime film. This weapon's shining moment in movie history, though, has to be the 1971 classic The French Connection, of course, starring Gene Hackman. And let's close out with a couple of views of the specimen in question, made 1957, the one I'm basing this video on. Detective Special, also a .38 Special, just a classic firearm of the 20th century. They saw a lot of action on both sides of the law, and as just a personal defense item. Recently, I saw some much rarer Colt 38 specials, so you will have videos on those coming up in the future as well. Thanks.